There are contracts without consideration, right? We always studied contract means consideration. Without consideration, you don't have contracts. That's how we studied so far. So there are certain contracts which are without consideration. Let's see what are they. Section 25. This is handled in section 25. An agreement made without consideration is void. Abdul Aziz Mazum Ali promised to donate 500 rupees construction of a mosque was held unenforceable. But as it was a gratuitous promise, lacking consideration. But gratuitous promise shall be enforceable by law if the promisee and the faith of such promise suffered a liability as suffering of detriment forms a valid consideration. We know that, right? Consideration can be a detriment, a loss, suffering, all that we saw that. So if you suffer all that, you may see it as a consideration, so you can ask for it. Ask for money. Right? Now it is not that. Exception to the general rule, no consideration, no contract. We know that rule. So agreements made on account of natural love and affection is valid if it is expressed in writing, if it is registered under law, if it is made on account of love and affection, it is between parties standing in a near relation to each other. Nearness of relation by itself doesn't necessarily import love and affection, right? So, a Hindu husband by a registered document promised to pay his wife ₹1,000 per month as his pocket money, as her pocket money. This agreement is valid. Hindu husband by a registered document, after referring to quarrels and disagreements between himself and wife, promised to pay his wife 1,000 for her maintenance. So this is not valid. There is no natural love, right? Promise to compensate, section 25. Promise to compensate. Such a promise made without consideration is valid if it is a promise to compensate. Promise to compensate is valid even though it doesn't have a consideration. The person said to be compensated has already done something voluntarily or has done something which the promiser was legally bound to do. Right? X finds Y's purse, gives it to him. Y promises to give 500 to X. This is a valid contract even though the consideration didn't move at the desire of Y, the promiser. Right? X finds the purse. Y has dropped it somewhere. X finds it, gives it to him. Y promises, I will give you 500 rupees. This is a valid contract. This is not at the desire of the promiser, of Y the promiser. So because somebody found it, he is moving it, right? On his own he is not saying. X, a neighbor, helped putting down the fire in Y's house. Afterwards, Y promised X to give 1,000 rupees. This is a valid contract even though consideration didn't move at the desire of the promiser. We already studied consideration must move from the promiser. Certain cases, compensation is separately considered. It is not forming the normal contract style for consideration. X supported Y's infant son, Y promised to pay X expenses in doing. This is a valid contract. Here, X has done that act which Y was legally bound to do. Instead of Y, X is done. Y is supposed to take care of Y's son, but X has taken care of his son. So, naturally, right, you have to compensate. There is no consideration necessary. Law of limitation. There is something called law of limitation. This is about debt. Debt is time barred if it is not paid in 3 years. This is the law of limitation. This will be used now. Promise to pay time barred debt, section 25(3). Such a promise without consideration is valid if it is made in writing, if it is signed by debtor and his agent, if it relates to a debt which could not be enforced by a creditor because of limitation, law of limitation, right? According to law of limitation, a debt which remains unpaid or unclaimed for a period of 3 years becomes a time barred debt time-bound debt which is legally not recoverable. But a promissory note issued in personal capacity by the wife of a debtor to pay his time-bound debt to her husband is not enforceable. Right? So these are all cases. There is no consideration there. It is only one side, right? Completed gifts. The gifts actually made by a donor and accepted by the donee are valid even without the consideration. Gifts, there is no consideration. X transferred some property to Y by a duly written registered deed as a gift. It is a valid contract even though no consideration moved. Similarly, for agency also you need not have a consideration. There is a temple. X promises 10,000 rupees. The temple authority. X fails to pay. Can sue, they cannot sue because there is no consideration. It's normal, right? If they suffer, if they have constructed something based on his promise, they suffered financial liability, they suffered mental liability, something they suffered, they can sue X. If they have not suffered anything, there is no consideration, so X need not pay. X promises to donate 10,000 towards the repairs of the temple. X doesn't pay. Can the trustee recover promised amount from X? We saw this example. If they are not incurred. So this is what the answer is. Very clear. Trustee cannot recover. First case. Recover the promised amount if there is a liability. Law of limitation. There is something called law of limitation. This is about debt. This we already saw this. There is a quarrel or something. There is no